His wife, Su Wan's ex-boyfriend, was diagnosed with a terminal illness. I anonymously transferred him a sum of money, but she found out. Su Wan threw the bank card in my face. We're already married. What more do you want? Do you have to use money to insult a dying man? I stared at her calmly. Don't forget, you were the one who begged me to marry you, Su Wan. The day I learned that Su Wan's ex-boyfriend was terminally ill, it was originally our planned anniversary trip. I was packing my suitcase and turned to ask Su Wan's opinion. Should I bring that navy blue suit? She stood there, staring blankly at her phone screen, as if she had lost her hearing. Su Wan, I called out again, and she suddenly snapped back to her senses, looking at me with a dazed expression. Qin Chuan. I frowned. What happened? Qin Chuan. He might not make it. After saying this, she rushed out the door without looking back. She ran so fast, as if 1 second later, that person would disappear forever. When I got to the hospital, Su Wan was already in Qin Chuan's ward. She gloomily flipped through his diagnosis report and asked in a deep voice, "How long have you been hiding this from me?" Qin Chuan curled up on the hospital bed, his face pale. Last month's checkup. The doctor said it was already in the late stage. There's no hope. Before he could finish, he noticed me standing at the door and suddenly choked up. I'm sorry, mister. Lou, I didn't mean to disrupt your marriage. It's just, I'm really desperate. I'm only 24 years old. I don't want to leave like this. Su Wan turned around, saw me. Her face suddenly turned uglier, her eyes full of blame. What are you doing here? At this moment, it was obviously inappropriate for me to mention the anniversary trip that we had planned in place of a missed honeymoon. So I said in a low voice, I came to see if there's anything I can help with. No need. Before Qin Chuan could speak, Su Wan coldly interrupted me. You go back. Before leaving, I couldn't help but look back at the two of them. Su Wan reached out and held Qin Chuan's shoulder, gently pulling him in her arms. Qin Chuan's face was pressed against her shoulder, his eyes closed, tears streaming down uncontrollably, his voice weak and desperate. Su Wan, I have nothing left. I only have you. Su Wan hugged him even tighter, her voice hoarse. I understand. As if they had never been separated, always deeply in love. I stared at this scene blankly, my heart surging with indescribable emotions, but I was helpless. In the face of the threat of death, any emotional expression from the one whose life is still intact is futile. At this moment, it seemed that I was the one who was superfluous. Su Wan and I grew up together and fell in love in high school. Later, my family encountered some changes, and I had to be sent abroad by my family to study alone. Because I couldn't be sure when I would be able to return, I reluctantly broke up with her. Her anger poured out like molten lava, accusing me of lacking faith in her by rejecting a long-distance relationship. Even on the day of my departure, she came to the airport, eyes red-rimmed, and whispered, Lu Shun, I'll be waiting for your return. No matter how long it takes, I'll wait, just as always. Because of that vow, I gritted my teeth and persevered alone through the toughest of times, completing my studies with astonishing speed. However, when I set foot back on home soil, Su Wan already had a new companion by her side. He was a tall, well-built guy named Qin Chuan, a junior from her university. It was said that he'd relentlessly pursued Su Wan, going to great lengths to please her for 2 years, and she'd only reluctantly accepted his advances. After returning to the country, our group of childhood friends gathered, and someone brought up Qin Chuan. To put it bluntly, he's just a simp. Wherever Wanjie goes, he follows. If she's working overtime, he buys coffee and delivers food. If she's feeling unwell, he takes care of her every step of the way. I heard he even wanted to tag along to our gathering today. Su Wan frowned, clearly displeased. Don't mention him anymore. Oh, I almost forgot. Lucian is back. I guess Wanjie will be saying goodbye to that kid. I glanced at Su Wan inadvertently. Her gaze was downcast, focused intently on her phone, her expression as cold as ice. The gathering that day was rather awkward. After it ended, Su Wan asked if I needed a ride home. I saw the undisguised anxiety in her eyes, revealing that this wasn't what she truly wanted. So I calmly replied, No need, I didn't drink, I drove here myself. She exhaled a sigh of relief and then drove away. It was only much later that I learned that day was Qin Chuan's birthday. He sat alone in a corner of the library, took a selfie with his birthday cake with a forced smile, and sent it to Su Wan. Su Wan drove all the way there at breakneck speed, finally reaching him in the last moments before midnight. Back home, half-packed luggage lay scattered across the bedroom. I put the luggage back one by one. My movements suddenly stopped when I picked up Su Wan's transparent makeup bag. Opening it, I was stunned to see the delicate perfume bottle inside. It was clear the perfume had been used for some time. It had a fresh, woody scent, not the type Su Wan would choose. As for who gave it to her, the answer was self-evident. I eventually put it in the drawer. Night fell, and Su Wan finally returned. Her eyes were bloodshot, the corners slightly red, her expression revealing a great deal of exhaustion and a trace of bewilderment. I stepped forward and said softly, "I've already taken care of canceling the flight and hotel reservations." "Okay. As for our parents, let's explain it to them when we go back this weekend. Just say we couldn't bring back the promised gifts this time, and we'll buy more next time we go abroad as compensation." I calmly explained the aftermath of this failed trip, but Su Wan suddenly erupted in anger. Her sharp gaze pierced me, and her voice was equally cutting. "Do you really need to tell me about such trivial matters? Can't you handle it yourself?" I froze, speechless for a moment. For some reason, a scene from years ago flashed through my mind. We were in the same high school then, but in different classes. I was being harassed by a few boys in my class, so I contacted their parents privately. The next day after school, those guys, even more relentless, cornered me in the equipment room. I had always handled these things independently, never telling Su Wan. But somehow Su Wan found out. She arrived just in time, shouting, "The police are here," scaring off the boys. Then she turned to me, her eyes blazing. "Why didn't you tell me you were in trouble? I can handle it myself, but I'm your girlfriend." Su Wan, still an impulsive teenager back then, stubbornly came to our class for evening self-study for half a month after saying that. She spent a long time, bit by bit, changing my habits. She made me get into the habit of telling her everything immediately and letting her know about everything I did. And now, she was telling me that I didn't need to tell her about such trivial matters. As if realizing she had lost control, Su Wan's emotions calmed slightly, her tone softening. "I'm sorry, Lu Shun. I've been a bit on edge lately." I took a deep breath. "I'm going to take a shower." When I came out of the bathroom, Su Wan was nowhere to be seen. I searched everywhere, finally finding her on the second-floor terrace, smoking one cigarette after another. Su Wan wasn't a heavy smoker. It was shortly after she had a huge fight with Qin Chuan and broke up with him that she proposed to me. That day, Qin Chuan was also at the proposal. He stood there, his face ashen, tears streaming down his face. Su Wan saw him, but didn't say a word. It was just that late that night. When I woke up, I found her alone on the balcony, smoking, her gaze fixed on the northern night sky, where a few sparse stars dotted the darkness. That direction happened to be where the city's tallest library was located. Just like last time, I quietly returned to the bedroom. Perhaps because I caught a chill, I woke up the next morning with a splitting headache. I have always suffered from migraines. As I was rummaging through drawers for painkillers, Su Wan suddenly burst out of the bathroom, striding towards me, her face terrifyingly dark. Her voice was suppressed with obvious anger. "Where's my perfume?" My temples throbbed, the pain unbearable. Before I could even speak, Su Wan suddenly grabbed my wrist tightly. "Lu Shun, where's my perfume?" she asked again, her grip so strong that I couldn't help but cry out in pain. The left drawer of the bedside table. Without a word, Su Wan rose to search for the makeup bag Qin Chuan had given her. I looked at the fingernail marks on my wrist and swallowed 2 painkillers from the bottle. Qin Chuan's sudden terminal illness had consumed all of Su Wan's thoughts. My headache naturally couldn't attract her attention. Of course, it was just a minor ailment. At least, in her eyes, it was. Over the next few days, Su Wan took a long leave from work. She rushed around, contacting almost all the top oncology experts in the city. Their diagnoses were largely the same. Qin Chuan's condition was terminal. Even with treatment, it would only slightly slow down the passing of his life. Each time she received such a result, the pain in Su Wan's eyes deepened. That evening, I was driving home when I happened to see Su Wan and Qin Chuan in the yard. Compared to our last meeting, Qin Chuan had lost even more weight. He had changed out of the monotonous hospital gown and was wearing a dark blue shirt, sitting quietly on the swing in the yard. The golden-red light of the setting sun spilled over him, coating his pale face with warmth. And my wife, Su Wan, was kneeling on one knee, feeding him water. I sat in the car, silently watching this scene. At that moment, I couldn't help but wonder. Perhaps Su Wan's most regrettable decision in this life was marrying me. I lingered in a nearby bar until late at night. Su Wan finally seemed to remember that a person like me existed in this world, and called. Before I could ask where she was, the familiar sound of the bar's band came through. After a moment's pause, I said, "I'll come get you." When I arrived at the bar, the band had already finished playing and was packing up to leave. Su Wan sat alone in the corner, an untouched glass of whiskey on the table. I stood in front of her, in the dim light. Her expression seemed somewhat cold. "Why are you drinking alone here?" "I didn't drink," she replied. "Just ordered a drink and sat here, listening to the music." I felt a little relieved and took her hand. "Let's go home." Once inside the car, I was met with a pungent smell of disinfectant. Clearly, after taking Qin Chuan back to the hospital, she had finally remembered my existence. I hesitated for a long time, but still asked, "How has Qin Chuan been lately?" Since learning of his illness, I had deliberately maintained a tacit silence in front of Su Wan, and this was the first time I had actively brought up Qin Chuan to her. She was silent for a moment, then replied, "The situation is not optimistic. I've arranged for the best doctors to treat him, but the results haven't been good." She seemed to realize that this statement was inappropriate, and her expression became somewhat uncomfortable. She added, "Lu Shun, don't misunderstand. I just feel that I was too harsh on him in the past, and I want to make up for it a little." That was the truth. I had heard from friends back home that Su Wan had always been cold to Qin Chuan. 6 months after I went abroad, Su Wan met Qin Chuan. Because Su Wan had helped him out of a difficult situation, Qin Chuan felt grateful to her, and this gratitude quickly turned into a burning love. For the next 2 years, no matter how cold and sarcastic Su Wan was, Qin Chuan maintained an extreme enthusiasm for her. In the end, Su Wan was finally moved by him. Of course, even during the relationship, Qin Chuan was the one who gave more. Su Wan's emotional ups and downs, her unpredictable moods, were commonplace for him. Thinking of this, I sighed deeply. Besides, he doesn't have much time left. When she said this, there was even a hint of a sob in Su Wan's voice. This feeling of helplessness and guilt that a living, healthy person feels in the face of an unconquerable disease, I could actually understand. It was precisely because of this that I felt so powerless at this moment. Even though Su Wan was my wife, even though I was her rightful, intimate partner. For the rest of the car ride, we each remained silent. When we returned home and walked through the courtyard, I unconsciously paused for a moment in front of the swing set. Su Wan turned her head and asked, "What's wrong?" I shook my head. "Nothing." It just felt a little glaring. After completing the formalities for inheriting the family business, I immediately had my secretary investigate Qin Chuan's background. As expected, he came from a poor family. His parents had died early, and he relied on scholarships and part-time jobs to get by. Su Wan was the only light in his life. If not for Su Wan's help, he might not have even been able to afford tuition in university. I arranged for him to work in one of my smaller companies as my last stand for this marriage, and also out of a bit of pity as someone in a similar situation. I also instructed my secretary to send Qin Chuan a bank card with a sum of money in it, under the guise of a distant relative. Unexpectedly, Su Wan still found out. That night, as soon as I opened the door, I saw Su Wan standing in the entryway, just a few steps away, staring at me with a blank expression. I was a little surprised. "Home so early today?" My answer was a bank card flying towards my face, grazing my eye. A sharp pain instantly pierced my temple, spreading like a tide, even making my fingertips curl involuntarily. Su Wan approached me step by step, her voice full of anger. "We're married. What are you still dissatisfied with? Does it give you a sense of accomplishment to humiliate a dying patient with money?" I didn't. It seemed that as a healthy person, I should unconditionally give way to satisfy the needs of the dying. "Lu Shun, you were born into a wealthy family, lived a life of luxury since childhood, studied at top universities abroad, and took over the family business upon your return. I broke up with him and agreed to your proposal. You've had a smooth life, you have everything, but he has nothing. Does humiliating him elevate your noble status even further? I close my eyes. Countless past events flash through my mind like a revolving lantern, a fragmented silent film. Su Wan. I try to keep my voice calm, but it still carried a slight tremor. You shouldn't talk to me like that. You shouldn't. Su Wan released my hand, took a step back, and stared at me, as if she wanted to say something. Just then, her phone suddenly rang. She took it out and saw Qin Chuan's name flashing on the screen. Su Wan's expression changed drastically, and without hesitation, she brushed past me and rushed out the door. I stared at the decorative painting on the wall, gently pressing the injured corner of my eye. The pain intensified. After that night, Su Wan didn't come home for several days. She remained out of contact, but I could guess that Qin Chuan's condition had worsened. He was in unbearable pain and had cried out to her for help. Su Wan, who had always protected me in any situation, had however chosen to rush to his side. The next day, I went to the hospital, and on the way, I went to the third floor where Qin Chuan was hospitalized, only to see Su Wan bustling around for Qin Chuan. Finally, she saw me at the nurse's station. After a long silence, I took out a business card from the inner pocket of my suit and handed it to her, saying calmly, "This is the contact information for the person in charge of critical illness medical care at Qin Chuan's company. Tell him to apply according to the procedure." Su Wan didn't even glance at the card. She looked at me with a strange and cold gaze, as if we were meeting for the first time. "Lu Shun, you're so calculating towards a dying person. It makes me feel like I don't know you." After Su Wan left, I remained frozen in place, clinging to my last shred of dignity. It wasn't until a young nurse approached and gently reminded me, "Sir, your shirt collar has coffee on it," that I snapped back to reality and thanked her. In fact, I had woken up with a splitting headache that morning, and in the hospital corridor just now, the migraine had become even more pronounced. Su Wan was so focused on Qin Chuan that she didn't even notice that I, having already seen the doctor, had bought a bottle of mineral water at the vending machine and taken painkillers at the nurse's station. Many years ago, I experienced my first migraine coincidentally at school. I was in so much pain that I could barely stand. Seeing this, Su Wan secretly ran to the pharmacy to buy painkillers, let me rest my head on her lap, and covered me with her jacket. But that was just a 14-year-old Su Wan. Leaving the third floor, I had a full-body checkup at the hospital. The doctor, with a grave expression, told me, "Mr. Liu, you need to learn to vent your emotions appropriately. It will benefit your health." I remained silent for a long time. "Thank you, but I have no one to confide in." And who could I confide in anyway? During my 3 years studying abroad, at my worst, I fainted from a migraine and was taken to the hospital by a classmate I didn't even know. After being discharged, I was walking through a secluded street when I was unfortunately robbed, and I was injured while fighting with the robber. I had long been accustomed to facing things alone. Besides, at that time, Su Wan and I had already broken up. After returning to China, she already had Qin Chuan by her side. I had even less of a reason to speak up. Agreeing to Su Wan's proposal did indeed carry some selfish motives, because during those nights when I was on the verge of breaking down, thinking of that stubborn girl at the airport who said she would always wait for me, a surge of courage would always emerge from my parched heart. Lost in thought, it was already noon. I slowly walked out of the hospital gate. Suddenly, a figure blocked my way. I looked up and it was Su Wan. She stared at me intently, her face terrifyingly gloomy, her voice filled with accusation. "Lu Shun, what are you still doing at the hospital?" I was stunned for a moment. Was there a hint of worry in her eyes? Was she afraid that I would end up like Qin Chuan? I gave a wry smile. "Just a routine checkup." Su Wan didn't believe it, so I had to take the medical examination report out of my briefcase and hand it to her. I intentionally hid the psychiatrist's diagnosis. Judging from various indicators, my physical condition was fine. Su Wan carefully examined the contents of the report, and finally her eyes fixed on the line, "Old abdominal injury. No serious problem." She looked up and questioned, "How did this injury happen? Why? Have I never heard you mention it?" I was stunned for a moment. "Oh, when I was studying abroad, I was involved in a bar fight and got stabbed." Su Wan's eyes seemed to pierce through people. I felt helpless and said, "Don't worry too much. I know my physical condition very well. I will have regular comprehensive examinations, and I won't be like Chin. Why did you hide it from me? She suddenly interrupted me and pressed closer. I understood that she was referring to today's physical examination. So I calmly met her gaze. It's just a routine checkup. Recently, Chin Chuan's situation is not very good, and I don't want to add to the trouble. At the mention of Chin Chuan, an obscure emotion flashed in her eyes. Eventually, the topic returned to me, and her tone softened. You suffered such an injury back then. How could you hide it from me? Lucian. This time, I couldn't help but sneer. When I was injured, I paused for a moment. It was probably when you were moved by Chin Chuan's persistence and agreed to be with him. Su Wan, on the day the stitches were removed, I saw your post on WeChat Moments. Over the next few days, Su Wan's attitude toward me suddenly shifted. Besides frequent intimate gestures, she even started waiting for me in my company every day after work. It felt like a dream, as if we were back to being 18. Back then, all we had was a pure, fervent love and nothing else. I pondered her intentions repeatedly, and finally, on the way home one day, I said to her, you really don't need to feel guilty. We were half a world apart back then. Even if you had known, there was nothing you could have done. The smile on Su Wan's face vanished instantly. She took a deep breath, her tone slightly agitated. I'm not trying to make up for anything. Lucian, you're my husband, and we've only been married for a little over a year. This is what's normal. Before I could respond, Su Wan's phone, which was lying on the dashboard, suddenly lit up. It was a message from Chin Chuan. Unexpectedly, Su Wan, uncharacteristically, ignored it. I asked her, how is Chin Chuan doing? Su Wan snorted coldly. What's it to me? There are plenty of people who want to take care of him. He doesn't need me to worry about him. I thought, if she looked in the rearview mirror at that moment, she would surely see the burning jealousy in her eyes. I soon understood why. A few days later, I went to the hospital to pick up some medication. Passing Chin Chuan's room, I saw him sitting on the bed in his hospital gown, his thin fingers constantly fiddling with his phone. Beside the bed stood a young woman with delicate features. She glanced at me warily at the door, then said softly to Chin Chuan, stop calling. She's married now. She needs to spend time with her husband. Chuan, you still have me. Chin Chuan paid no attention, continuing to dial Su Wan's number, tears streaming down his face as he murmured, don't ignore me. Su Wan, you said you'd be with me until the end. I admit, at that moment, a flicker of envy arose within me. Because my life's trajectory had long been arranged by others, I had never had a real choice of my own. Back home, Su Wan had already prepared dinner. I casually mentioned, I ran into Chin Chuan today while getting my medication. He seems to have lost even more weight. Su Wan stared at me, her eyes suddenly turning sharp. What were you doing going to see him? Her gaze was like a sharp scalpel, instantly slicing me open from my self-deceiving dream. A hint of mockery appeared at the corner of my mouth. Don't misunderstand. I wasn't looking for trouble with him. I just happened to be passing by. That's not what I meant, Su Wan said, her eyes flickering. Perhaps to make up for her impulsiveness, she suggested that we go out on a date for my birthday next month. See the midnight movie, then go for a drive, and finally find a place to watch the sunrise. I should have refused, but the anticipation in her eyes was so genuine, and the plan she proposed was exactly what we had done on our 16th birthday. At that time, I was suffocated by family pressure. Although Su Wan didn't know the details, she keenly sensed my low spirits, even coming to knock on my window in the middle of the night to take me away from my house. We watched a movie together, Fight Club. When it ended, the sky was just starting to lighten. Su Wan drove me along the coastal highway and finally stopped at the edge of a cliff. The morning sun slowly rose, and she confessed her feelings to me with her back to the sunrise. But that was a long time ago. So long ago that she might need to retrace those steps to awaken those dusty memories. Sensing that the door to her sealed memories seemed to have been opened, I said yes. It was as if we were back on that night when we were 16. Even rewatching the same movie couldn't bring back the original feeling. It's like when I'm with Su Wan, I always unconsciously recall the past. This means that the present her can no longer balance my love and disappointment. I'm just unwilling to give up, always missing the times in the past when she held me, preventing me from falling. Realizing this, I shifted my attention to Su Wan beside me. She was absent-minded, her gaze wandering. From time to time, she would take out her phone, glance at it, and then quickly put it away as if burned. I calmly reminded her, "The phone keeps ringing. Someone is looking for you." Su Wan forced a smile. "Don't worry about it. Today is your birthday. I want to spend it with you." The sad and ridiculous thing is, I actually believe this. The movie ended, and Su Wan answered the 28th call from Chuan. A weak, crying voice came from the other end. "Su Wan, I can't hold on any longer." I coughed up blood again. "I feel like I'm going to die, Su Wan." Under my gaze, Su Wan calmly put away her phone, then leaned over and gently stroked my cheek. "I'm going to the restroom." After she left, she never came back. I waited for a long, long time at the entrance of that secluded seaside private cinema and finally called Su Wan. But her phone was off. After hanging up, I saw that Chuan had sent a WeChat friend request. I accepted it. He quickly sent a few messages. "Mr. Liu, sorry to disturb your birthday. I just wanted to confirm how much weight I still hold with her. You are irreplaceable in Su Wan's heart. No matter how hard I try, I can't shake your position in her heart. But I don't have much time left, so let me be indulgent for once and be a selfish person." Irreplaceable. What a she-sheen way to put it. An uncontrollable anger surged in my chest. Before I could reply, I was suddenly pulled forcefully into a small alley beside me. I was thrown to the ground, my knees and elbows scraping against the rough surface, a sharp pain shooting through me. I looked up, meeting a pair of malicious eyes. Somewhat familiar, yet unfamiliar. Oh, it was the girl in black who sat by Chuan's bedside that day. "You're Su Wan's husband? You dare to make Chuan unhappy. He endures the torment of illness every day. And what about you? You're living comfortably as a rich man. And that's not enough. You have to occupy the person Chuan likes, making the last moments of his life miserable." She lowered the brim of her baseball cap, her eyes filled with malice. "Make him suffer, but don't let him die." The sky was gradually turning white. Sunrise was imminent. A burly man emerged from behind the girl and stopped in front of me. Dust billowed. Why did everyone feel sorry for Chuan? I was the one who had nothing. Memories flooded back, and this time I saw things more clearly. When I was 6, my father was suddenly diagnosed with late-stage lung cancer. Even after surgery, the cancer couldn't be controlled. As he lay in bed, his life flickering like a candle in the wind, someone came to our house. It was my uncle, my father's twin brother, who bore a striking resemblance to my dad. He naturally took his brother's place, taking over everything that should have belonged to my father. My mother didn't object. I was young and naive then, not understanding why I suddenly had to call my uncle Dad, nor why, just a month after he came to our house, I had a half-brother. I only remember my father, on his deathbed, holding my hand tightly. "Shun, promise me, you'll live strong, and take care of yourself." Those words became a burden I couldn't shake off, so that every time I heard Chuan say he wanted to give up, a complex mix of emotions surged within me. The one who longed to live, longed to be loved, was terminally ill, while the one who sought release had to live on, burdened by guilt. At home, I felt suffocated. My mother said that as the eldest son, I had to shoulder the responsibilities of the Liu family. My brother, however, could do as he pleased, acting recklessly without consequence. After Su Wan's incident was exposed, my mother asked my uncle to talk to me. He was wearing my father's suit, my father's watch, and looked at me with a condescending, pitying gaze. "It's fine to date, but don't gamble your future away. That would make you worthless. Liu Shun, you're the older brother. Your duty is to shoulder the family's responsibilities and ensure your brother's well-being." When I was 20, he gave me 2 choices. Either marry a business partner 20 years my senior immediately, or go abroad to study business, return after graduation to get married to whoever I wanted, and take over the company. I chose the latter. After I returned, they began searching for the most suitable marriage partner, figuring out which family alliance would bring the greatest benefit to the Liu family. Their considerations were calm, rational, and thorough, except they never cared about my thoughts. It was then that Su Wan proposed to me. I accepted. I still harbored a fantasy, thinking that she could, as she had in the past, grab hold of me, teetering on the edge of a cliff, and desperately prevent me from falling into the abyss. But beside her, already stood Qin Chuan. As my clothes were being ripped and ravaged, I finally reached the belt that had been discarded nearby. I immediately grasped it and lashed out fiercely in retaliation. Bright red liquid splattered, staining my face as the man emitted a pained howl and crumpled to the ground. Clutching the bloodied belt, I slowly pulled myself up, leaning against the wall. Not far away, the girl, startled by the commotion, turned her head to stare at me. A dark haze lurked in her eyes. "You've got some fight in you." I caught my breath for a moment and said to her, "It was always Qin Chuan, the one you adored, who let you down. No matter how infatuated you are with him, his heart only belongs to Su Wan. Even though Su Wan is married, even though he doesn't have long to live, he won't spare you a glance." "Shut up." She rushed over, enraged, and slapped me hard across the face. If you had refused Su Wan's proposal, even if they had argued, they could have reconciled, and he could have been happily with Su Wan. My cheek burned. I looked up at her, calmly curling my lips into a smile. Why should I refuse? If, after arguing with Su Wan, Qin Chuan had said he wanted to spend the rest of his life with you, would you have declined? His life hangs by a thread, and no matter how capable you are, you can't cure his incurable disease, so you can only vent your anger on me, an innocent person. I paused, then softly uttered 2 words, pathetic. Since you miss him so much, why not join him in the afterlife? At that moment, I recalled the doctor's stern advice. Mr. Liu, expressing your emotions appropriately will be beneficial for you. It turned out to be true. The girl stared at me blankly, and after a moment, suddenly let out a piercing wail, sliding down the wall and curling up on the ground. She cried hysterically. I simply watched, a question in my heart. These people always claim to be the most pitiful in the world. Qin Chuan, Su Wan, and her, without exception. I struggled to straighten my disheveled shirt, and as I left the alley, the first light of dawn appeared on the distant horizon. I took a taxi to the police station to report the incident, handing over the bloodstained belt, and asked the officer if this constituted self-defense. The young male officer looked at me, his clear eyes filled with compassion. "Mr. Liu, please rest assured, the injuries on your body are enough to prove that the other party intended to cause harm." "But, are you all right?" "I'm fine," I replied. "Do you need us to contact your relatives to pick you up?" "Who could I contact?" I lowered my gaze and forced a smile. "No need. My family all have their own important matters to attend to." After completing the statement, I returned home, retrieved the long-prepared divorce agreement, signed it, and mailed it to Su Wan's company. Throughout the entire process, Su Wan never once contacted me, but I could see from Qin Chuan's social media that she had accompanied him to Yunnan. The reason, naturally, was the same overused excuse. Something like he didn't have much time left, or this was his dying wish. In the Tsangshan Mountains and Arai Lake, he sat in a wheelchair, pushed slowly by her, his frail but stubborn figure appearing particularly resolute in the sunlight. The content he shared with everyone was also very touching. He said, "Su Wan, after I die, scatter my ashes here so my soul can be free. If you occasionally remember me, come here and enjoy the scenery." How romantic! Even in death, he had to die so romantically and profoundly to make Su Wan remember him for the rest of her life. After browsing this post, I coldly deleted Qin Chuan from my friend list. Actually, I could guess Su Wan's thoughts. She didn't contact me, carrying a kind of self-deceiving escapism, as if as long as she didn't speak, silently accompanied Qin Chuan through the last journey of his life, and then returned to me, we could pretend nothing had happened and continue to walk hand in hand. But this was no longer possible. Before leaving the city, I went to see someone. It was a mutual friend of Su Wan and mine, named Yixian. Due to my personality, I had almost no friends growing up. She barely counted as one. "I'm leaving." She, with a cigarette in her mouth, stood up abruptly. "No way. Are you terminally ill too?" I chuckled. "How is that possible? I just don't want to stay here any longer. I'm planning to move to another city." "Then what are you going to do about the Liu family's business?" "I don't want it," I said calmly, and then repeated, "From beginning to end, I never wanted it." In fact, everyone knew that Su Wan was entangled with her terminally ill ex-boyfriend. Everyone was watching my joke. So when I informed my family about the divorce, My uncle said gently, "It doesn't matter for a family like ours. A second marriage won't devalue you." I twitched the corners of my mouth. "I have no value. Don't even think about it. The Liu family company is returned to you. This is what you've always coveted. My father's things, they've long been yours." I said, "If you don't want the scandal of the Liu family forcing the eldest son to death to come out, give me freedom." In his eyes, which were always clear and gentle, anger appeared for the first time. Yi Xian lowered her voice, speaking each word deliberately. "It's not surprising, Ah Shun. Your own wife spending every day with a dying man." I couldn't bear it either. These words could no longer touch me. My love and expectations for Su Wan had long vanished. I told Yi Xian, "If Su Wan asks, don't reveal my whereabouts." Liu Shun, you have everything. Su Wan, I have nothing, only an empty shell. Yi Xian told me that not long after I left, Su Wan returned. She was alone. Qin Chuan was not with her. Presumably, he had ultimately failed to survive and had found his final rest in Dali, fulfilling his wish. Su Wan kept calling me, but I never answered. She sent messages. "What does this mean? Do you want a divorce, Liu Shun?" I did not reply, nor was there any need to. Yi Xian said that Su Wan was like a trapped beast, searching for me everywhere. She even barged into the Liu family home. When she barged in, my father and uncle were discussing whether to trick me into returning to marry me off to that powerful and wealthy woman. "Liu Shun, you should have seen Su Wan's expression at that time." TSK, Yi Xian said on the phone. "Also, there's progress on the report you filed. The police sent a receipt to your house and called to say they couldn't reach you, but the two people who hurt you have been caught." Yi Xian also told me that Su Wan went to the police station and inquired about the details of that day. Perhaps out of sympathy, the male officer told her everything without reservation. Su Wan quickly broke down. After walking out of the police station, she knelt on the roadside and wept loudly. Yi Xian was beside her, watching as Su Wan lifted her tear-reddened eyes and asked again, Xian, do you really not know where Liu Shan went?" "I don't know." Yi Xian shrugged. "You know Liu Shan, he's always been cold. He's close to no one, except you." These words seemed to completely crush Su Wan. She even began to frantically investigate my experiences over the years, including my 3 years abroad. With each detail of my suffering that was uncovered, Su Wan crumbled further. I imagined she must have regretted the things she had said. But it was too late. Hearing of Su Wan's pain, I felt no pleasure, only a cold indifference. Neither the experiences of the past nor the memories of the present could stir any ripples within my heart. For a long time, I've been like a walking corpse. Only Su Wan. She showed me a glimmer of light in my stagnant life. Now, even that glimmer has been extinguished. That day, Yi Xian told me that our alma mater was holding an anniversary celebration and inviting distinguished alumni to attend. The invitations for both Su Wan and me were sent to her. Su Wan went to visit her teacher, and the grade director said with emotion, "After all these years, you and Liu Shun have always been together and even got married. It's truly rare. Very few childhood sweethearts make it to the end." Su Wan stood there woodenly, listening to the director reminisce about the past, those fragments of memory she had deliberately sealed away. She must have remembered how much she loved you when she was 17 or 18. After the college entrance examination, everyone was drunk, and she was still murmuring about marrying Liu Shun in the future. Yi Xian paused, so when we left the school, I told her directly, "Stop pretending. Liu Shun was abroad for 3 years, and you never even went to see him. You were only concerned with getting entangled with Qin Chuan. Besides, he has already given up on you." Su Wan has always been clever. From this sentence, she guessed that Yi Xian and I were still in contact, so she inquired about my address from Yi Xian. That afternoon, I returned from the hospital with medicine and found Su Wan standing at the door. Seeing me, her eyes immediately turned red. Ah Shun, are you sick?" "No, I'm very healthy," I said indifferently. "Just some psychiatric drugs. I've been taking them for years. They won't kill me for the time being, at least not as tricky as cancer." After saying that, I walked past her into the yard, but Su Wan grabbed the corner of my clothes, pleading, "Ah Shun, I don't want a divorce." I found it ridiculous. In her repeated choices to accompany Qin Chuan, my feelings for her had long been worn away. Now that Qin Chuan was gone, she came looking for me. What was this? I said coldly. If you can't let go of Qin Chuan, you might as well go and accompany him. I haven't not let go of him. She suddenly raised her voice, then said softly, I told you from the beginning, Qin Chuan had cancer and was dying. I just wanted to accompany him through his final journey out of guilt. I'd already lost count of how many times she had mentioned this excuse to me, as if because he had cancer, the entire world should unconditionally accommodate him, and in the face of death, everything should give way. I finally couldn't help but sneer, so what? It's just a terminal illness. Is he the only one facing death? All these years I've taken sleeping pills, slashed my wrists, and even lingered on the edge of skyscraper, only to be pulled back every time. When he was crying to you about his numbered days, I was consumed by jealousy. I envy him for being able to leave this world without any burdens. If I could, I'd trade places with him. Let me be free, and let him go on living, staying by your side in peace. That way, everyone would be happy. Wouldn't that be better? Su Wan stared at me in disbelief, her eyes like the waters of a lake in late autumn, now veiled with a thin mist of despair and pain. Shun, I never thought. If I had realized, Su Wan couldn't finish the rest of her sentence, because she was no longer able to speak. It was clear that she had made the mistake, that she had hurt me, but at this moment she was sobbing uncontrollably in front of me, as if I were the one causing her pain. Even so, my heart remained undisturbed. Su Wan, people are always changing, and I'm constantly changing too. So even though you promised to wait for me when you were 20, and then resolutely left at 24, I never blamed you. I truly loved you, so much that even after all these years, only you can touch my heartstrings. Even when you first abandoned me, running to Qin Chuan without hesitation, I could let it go. It's just that this love has been worn away by you bit by bit, whether it's you or Qin Chuan or that madman obsessed with Qin Chuan. Your reasons for hurting me are all the same. Because I live a life of comfort, I have everything, while you are always caught in a dilemma, unable to get what you love, carrying all sorts of regrets. Now, I've given up everything. I have nothing. Can you let me go? Su Wan finally disappeared from my world. Occasionally, I would hear a few words about her from Yixian. For instance, those two people who hurt me suddenly died mysteriously in prison. For instance, the Su family suddenly started to suppress the Liu family's company recklessly, even using absurdly high prices to snatch business. In the end, the Liu family went bankrupt, and the Su family was also greatly weakened. The pure gold shackles that had confined me for over 20 years finally crumbled. After learning this news, I was stunned for a rare moment, and then went to a nearby convenience store to buy 2 bottles of beer. Because I've had my stomach pumped several times, it's always been fragile and unable to handle alcohol. Occasionally, when I go to a bar, I just order a drink and leave it there without drinking it. But life's rare joys should be celebrated. I took a couple of small sips, felt a slight pain in my stomach, and put the beer can down. Just then my phone rang. I answered. It was Su Wan. Her voice also carried a hint of drunkenness. Shun, I've avenged you. For a moment, I was pulled back to when I was 14. I was bullied, and she went to complain to the principal, finally returning to me with a victorious smile, saying, I did it, Shun. Those who bullied you have all been punished. That was the beginning of my affection for her. The memory was immediately interrupted by the image of Qin Chuan's face. I quickly regained my composure. I'm hanging up, Su Wan said in a flustered and helpless voice. Don't. Shun, I just want to hear you say a few more words. I sneered. Have you been at Songshan and Arai Lake to visit Qin Chuan recently? Su Wan didn't speak, but the breathing on the other end of the phone suddenly became rapid, carrying a deep-seated fear. I forgot to tell you, actually, that night, when you left me to find Qin Chuan, he added me as a friend. So, every stop of your trip, everything you did, I knew it all. Su Wan, I know you've done a lot for me, but that doesn't erase the hurt you've caused me. The night breeze, wrapped in moonlight, gently brushed by. After a long while, Su Wan's voice finally came again, carrying a strained sob. Yes, I am unforgivable. Shun, all the fault is mine. I should be the one to suffer you. You must be well. I was silent for a moment, then hung up the phone. A few days ago, I went to the hospital for a checkup, and the doctor said my mental state had improved. Perhaps escaping all the heavy burdens has, instead, given me a bit more courage to move forward. It's true that I haven't dreamed of my teenage self and Su Wan for a long time. I threw the beer can into the trash and left the balcony. Tonight, I need to rest early. Tomorrow, I'm going to mountaintop to see the sea of clouds.